In today's webinar, Best Practices from Vans, Proactively Combating Counterfeiters, we'll be discussing how a world-renowned brand proactively addresses the challenges brought on by counterfeiters. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today's presentation. We are joined by brand protection expert Jenny Dirks. Jenny is Senior Manager of Global IP and Brand Enforcement at Vans. She has managed the intellectual property portfolios and brand enforcement program at Vans for the past 9 years. Prior to Vans, she worked at Kohler Co. for 13 years, primarily coordinating patent filings with product and design, but also handling trademark, copyright, and domain name filings. Jenny holds a Bachelor's of Arts in International Business and a Master of Business Administration from Lakeland College. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Jenny to get us started.
Thanks for joining us, Paul. I hope at the end of the day everyone can take at least something away from it. For those of you that don't know, Vans is a Southern California footwear, apparel, and accessories brand. It was founded in 1966 by the Van Doren family, 3 of them still working with the company. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, and we're going strong. So with that, today I just want to talk to you a little bit about our brand enforcement program. I'm going to give you an overview of what brand enforcement means to Vans and VF. I want to present some key challenges and improvements and changes we made to build the robust program that we have today. So with that, what does intellectual property mean to Vans? Or what does a brand enforcement mean to Vans? Brand enforcement means, at the end of the day, intellectual property is your foundation. It's what allows you to enforce on your brand. It's your trademarks, patents, copyrights, domains. It's obviously the most valuable intangible asset of a company. It allows Vans to grow strong. It helps minimize risk in terms of keeping our brand out of trouble. And, of course, we use our IP to keep others away and maintain the value of our brand. Our brand enforcement program is primarily made up of oppositions, infringements, counterfeits, online brand enforcement, and diversion. Vans has a fairly unique intellectual property portfolio. We have 5 main marks that are copied and counterfeited, which is the Vans Off the Wall skateboard logo, our tagline Off the Wall, and our Vans Flying V logo. But in addition, the unique part of our portfolio is that our most knocked off marks are our design marks, which are our checkerboard on the vamp, our waffle sole, and our side stripes. So these design marks and our intellectual property and the growth of our company has led us to many challenges in terms of how we enforce, where we enforce, et cetera. So like I said earlier, Vans was a small, iconic brand purchased by VF in 2005. They had immediate plans of expanding globally, and our brand grew at a rapid pace. We had a small intellectual property portfolio. We needed to fill gaps and put new filing strategies in place. We had a brand enforcement program in place, but it was very ad hoc. We were whack-a-mole heavy, and we really need to focus on diving deep and getting those manufacturers and those middleman resellers. We had a lack of resources. I was a one-man team for a few years after I got here. We had no case management system. The relationships I had when I came, I had inherited, so I needed to learn who was who, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and whether or not they actually fit in the program going forward. And last but not least, there was an increase in online market presence pretty much around the time I got here in 2007, where our e-com program exploded, marketplaces boomed, and social media came to the forefront. One last thing we did have, which I am sure affects a lot of all of your programs, is budget limitations. Our budget limitations forced us to really focus on which areas and what would have the largest impact on the program. So best practices. So based on our challenges, the first best practice I put into place coming from the plumbing industry was a lot different than footwear and apparel, especially in the counterfeiting area. So I needed to really focus on product. What are we selling? When I got here, I'm a Midwest girl from Wisconsin. I thought we were Vans with checkerboard slip-ons, but I got here and I was happily mistaken. We sell footwear, apparel, and accessories. We have 5 core silhouettes that are copied every day: our skate high, our slip-on, our old school, our authentic, and our era. They've all been around since the late 70s. Also, our most counterfeited products are t-shirts, hats, and backpacks. I needed to learn what products were trending and where in the world. Just like any fashion brand, certain silhouettes, certain product trend every year. I needed to learn what type of features we had in place in terms of identifying a real product, which currently today we do have an ultraviolet light on our tongue tag, and we do have several markings on our products. One of them is a factory stamping in the waffle, which all our counterfeiters have caught on to, but we also have a few other hidden. I needed to learn our sourcing, where our materials were coming from. I needed to learn where we're manufacturing, which is China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. So I needed to learn our supply chain, where product was coming from and going to, and how it was getting there. And our distribution channel, I needed to make friends with our distributors, our authorized accounts, and licensees and retailers. Another key initiative we had in terms of best practices was really prioritizing key countries and regions. It seemed like our brand enforcement program was all over the place, but it was because it was a lot smaller company then versus now. So we really needed to focus on our key selling markets, where our revenues were coming in, our transshipment areas, how our product was getting from A to B. Our manufacturing markets, we expanded manufacturing markets. We also, our main channels of trade was online, was a new and upcoming way. And then we also, our retail stores doubled in number, both domestically and internationally. We also needed to take a look at our emerging markets, because we were a new brand of VF. Our 5-year plan was to proactively expand in at least 20 markets, which is a lot of work on the trademark end, much less the enforcement end. We also had to consider markets, third-party knockoff trademark filings, which today we have a huge problem, as I'm sure all of you do, in China, and India is a close second on that one. Next, we had to look at our IP portfolio and really fill in those gaps, because without our IP, as I said earlier, we couldn't really enforce. And our design marks are very hard to get registered, as some of you can imagine that do deal with design marks. So first things first, we conducted an audit of our intellectual property portfolio, primarily our trademark portfolio, as that's where a lot of our intellectual property sits. We had to focus on priority markets and build filing strategies. And we built a tier system for our trademarks, and of course our tier 1 marks are our most important and most copied marks, so they're automatic. We had to make sure that we were covered in all main classifications on a country-by-country basis, which we are still dealing with today, obviously. I mean, realistically, we went from major to now an emerging, and we're constantly going into new markets. We had to make sure our main classifications were covered, which are 9, 18, 25, 35, and 41, since Vans does retail, and we also do a lot of skating, BMX events, and surf events, in addition to the Warped Tour as well. We had to keep updated and informed of new products, trademarks, and logos. And like I said, like recently we just added the Pro Series, which is a pre-Olympic skateboarding competition. So we do the logo work for that. We're doing the same thing in the BMX area. We always have new products coming out, new categories, so we really need to stay on top of that. We had to make sure that we were recorded with customs in all the main ports and countries. And just recently, finally, we decided in China to get a general bond, and we're working with the North Face's firm on doing that, and it's finally in place and really working. which has saved a lot in bond fees and allowed us to really seize a lot more coming through customs. Financial justification and budget, always fun. The first thing we needed to consider was quality, quantity, cost, and return when seizing products. So a lot of what was happening was we were just looking for numbers. So we were skimming the top, and we were paying a lot of money for small seizures. So we've turned that around right now. We really prioritize by market, key targets, volume, and cost, and what makes sense for the business. We have to track our brand enforcement budget by region. So we report out what we spend where, and we do remind the business that enforcement is global, since everybody thinks their project or their sighting is the most important. We break down expenses by prosecution, oppositions, disputes, and seizures and raids. We also just recently put in place, I know many of you probably know Chris Turk. He is our General Counsel of IP and Brand Enforcement, and sits on the East Coast. He decided to distribute a quarterly newsletter, which encompasses all of VF brands, and we do report out our custom seizures and raids and our online enforcement numbers. We also do from a Vans perspective, because our executives and the business want more detail in terms of what we're really working on. We put out a biannual Vans branded brand enforcement report as well by region, so each region can see what we're doing and how we're doing it. Resources and business relationships, key and important, cooperation and trust. To start internally, at one point in time, the VF brands, all the brand enforcement people in the VF family are spread all over the country. And at one point in time, we just kind of all did our own thing, but thanks to Chris and Lisa and Chris Schultz over at Timberland, we all put together a group. It's a brand enforcement group. We have calls every month to discuss resources. We join forces on raids and seizures, online investigations, certain enforcement issues, like right now we're dealing with Russia, and share best practices. We also have an annual brand summit, which is usually hosted at one of the brands every year, in which we all get together in person to discuss our enforcement programs and going forward. Externally, law firms, investigators, vendors, and other brands. Key thing is these are the main people you rely on a country-by-country basis. Don't be afraid to push back and ask questions. Work with firms that are really invested in your brand and interested in getting to know what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it, because the more they know, the better customer service they can give you. I would definitely recommend not being set on having one provider in each country. Diversity definitely has its strengths, and some firms, most firms, really are good at one or two things, and to have that diversity across the board in terms of what you need done and how you want it done, it's always good to have a few different providers to choose from. Changing things up is key. Just like anything else, your brand enforcement program is there are always trends, it's always moving. For instance, for us, like footwear was the core counterfeited product, and now we're noticing a trend in which counterfeiters are moving on to our apparel and accessories. Online brand enforcement, key part of our program, obviously, and I'm sure for everybody else as well. There was a point in time when I first got here, when you could actually file a UDRP proceeding to get rid of some of your website problems, but that day no longer exists. And so I found, well, I actually was working with Mark Monitor for nearly 20 years now. When I worked at Kohler Co., we were working with them on the domain name side. And when I came on board here, I realized that I had a brand enforcement problem. So they were one of the first people I called. My first recommendation, and we deal with this every day still, thanks, and I really want to give a shout out to Trevor Robbins and his team. He's wonderful, and he's really helped curtail our program and help solve a lot of issues that normally we would have never thought we could conquer. Really ensure that all key platforms are you're working on all key platforms as websites are covered. So we started out, we had a website issue, we had an internet issue. So we started out with working in a different module, but we realized that Vans had different problems. We definitely had website problems, but that we needed to conquer, and we didn't have a lot of repeat offenders. So what we did was we used their website module, which we have a 97% compliance rate on. So what we primarily do is just take down websites that are selling unauthorized product or counterfeits. And if we do see something key, we will investigate further. Like if we see a major counterfeiter or we notice website numbers are higher, we'll take another look. Local presence is definitely recommended. Working with a vendor that has a local presence, especially in China, is huge for us. Like I'm sure all of you, we have major issues on marketplace sites in Asia. Conduct an annual review. My biggest recommendation here is, working with a vendor that provides flexibility, which MarkMonitor does. We've added platforms to our websites. We also watch marketplaces and social media. We're kind of getting a feel for what's going on, where we need to concentrate, what we can put down for a month or two and come back to. So conducting that annual review, really taking an overall look of what's been happening and then rebuilding or being flexible around what your next steps are is important. We have monthly strategy calls with Trevor and his team, which is key, and they provide us with this report and takeaways and numbers, and I think it's really important because, especially in the marketplace area, like we always discuss, like, well, we're gonna really focus on Alibaba this month, and we're gonna let go of some of the Latin American websites because they seem to be doing okay, and it's just more a matter of maintenance. So it's really tailoring it to your brand's needs. Which is kind of takedown programs. We prioritize repeat offenders. Thankfully, we don't have a lot of them. Our reserve for litigation list is fairly small compared to, I know, some of our other VF brands. We take a look at website traffic, and then we also take another look at some of those websites that we're receiving complaints on from the business and consumers. Engagement, I think it's important for not only your vendor to have good relationships and local presences, but it's also important for the brand and the brand enforcement team to have relationships with the marketplace sites as well. We recently had a case of a big counterfeit case on Alibaba, and due to our relationships with them, we were actually able to work out a takedown procedure that actually helped us resolve part of the issue. Keeping up with other brands, like not only internally other brands, but also externally, knowing, really talking to other brands in the industry, what they're doing, what's working, what's not working is super important to help give you information on going forward with your enforcement program. Another main part of our program is, of course, investigations. And when I got to Vans, our investigations were very scattered. They were very number-oriented. I'm still convinced that some of the vendors we were using at the time weren't legitimate vendors or investigators, but I know it happens. And to fix things, the first thing I did was I needed someone to coordinate our seizure and raid program. It's a full-time job. I was really looking for someone specific. It took me nearly 2 years. I was looking for someone that knew the latest and the greatest in the local authorities and had traveled and not sat behind a desk for his or her career. And I found him, and he works for us on contract part-time and coordinates all of our investigations, seizures, and raids globally. And with that, we really had to establish a formal process and guidelines for all of our internal people. So we established a guideline and a form that all of our distributors and the business can fill out for counterfeit diversion or infringement sightings. We also, same thing as with your law firms, it's important to really have diversity across the board. Having more than one investigator in each country is super important. Everybody, I mean, when you're hiring someone, it's really key to make sure they really know the market in which they're advertising and marketing, that they can help you in, and knowing what their strengths and their limitations are. Monthly strategy sessions, we actually have, my investigator and I actually have weekly sessions every Monday morning. We go over hot targets, fresh intel. We look at current cases, make sure everything's moving along just the way it's supposed to. We also, on those calls, discuss like enforcement tactics and targets. For the most part, we file criminal proceedings versus civil just because of the cost and the timing and the benefit. And we also collaborate with a lot of our competitors in terms of if we find seizures or raids that have other brands in it as well, we'll work with them to actually seize and raid and then save on costs, which benefits everybody. Market monitoring is something that we've added to our program over the course of the last 3 years, and it's primarily because Vans is going direct in a lot of its markets. So we do annual market surveys, which have proven to be very beneficial. I think it helps the brand enforcement team get to know the market, and we've actually found things, of course, aside from tips we get from the business or things we find online during our investigations, which is super cool. Hotlines and customer service, we do rely heavily on the business. I mean, there are eyes and ears out there, especially our sales folks that are out in all the regions. VF doesn't have brand enforcement people that sit in each region. We all sit here in the U.S., so we try to get out and travel and know the business, but it's hard from time to time, so relying on your customers and your business is truly helpful. That's where most of our tips come in. Training, we do baseline training for all of our staff, of course, and we also do IP and brand enforcement training for the business as well, just so everybody knows who's who and where to report things and what we're doing. We are provided periodic updates, usually from our GCs that sit here and us as we are out and about and hear things at conferences or on calls or newsletters that we see, we share as best practices. Customs, last but not least, customs and law enforcement training. VF, we've come together. We have people sitting on every coast and in the middle. So what we do is we divide up the trainings, and we've prioritized ports and areas that we really need to get into and do that training. Again, like your law enforcement and your customs people are your eyes and ears and can completely help the brand in terms of battling their counterfeit issues. That concludes my presentation. Brand enforcement is constantly evolving. Every program is different. You just have to find what works for you. It comes with continuous challenges. Just get out there and network. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Gain knowledge from others in the industry. Think outside the box, be creative, and stay positive. Don't get discouraged. Just focus on your priorities and take it one day at a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. We're now ready to open it up to our Q&A session. As a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A tab on your screen. We've had a few questions come up during the presentation, so we'll take a look at them now. Jenny, so the first question is, how do you prioritize your online brand protection program? For example, how did you determine which marketplaces to focus on first?
Well, we started out, in terms of marketplaces, we started out with the basic marketplaces, and we did a sweep of those landscapes just to determine what kind of problems we had. And then we actually moved on regionally, so we worked with all of our regional folks, asking them what their core marketplace sites are locally, and also added them to our program as well. And we kind of change out marketplaces because, like I said earlier, like sometimes one is trending and one is not. So we'll focus on maybe Mercado for a couple months, and then we'll see numbers go down, and then we'll move our focus over to Alibaba or whatever the case may be.
Great. The next question is, justifying a budget for online brand protection has been a challenge. How did you justify a budget for your executive team?
Okay, well, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, the web is in everybody's face all day, every day. So, I mean, our brand enforcement issues online are very apparent to our executives, and they completely support us and would love to see the problem completely cleaned up, which we continuously tell them will never happen. But yeah, they definitely support us, and we show numbers every quarter that support our program and what we're cleaning up. So that's how we get our budget for that.
Great. Do you have a list of preferred vendors worldwide? If so, would you be willing to share their information?
I do, and maybe in I will share, of course.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit more about your program in China? What exactly are you doing to help solve your brand protection program in China, especially in the online space?
Well, I mean, brand protection in China, I mean, it takes up probably about 50% of our brand enforcement program, to be honest. I mean, first things first, we did a trademark audit. We made sure we're covered in subclasses across the board and own every single good that we sell, or trademarks for every single good that we sell. And we're still dealing with issues there on other parties owning parts of our mark, which seems to be pretty normal in this industry especially. Another thing we did, as I mentioned earlier, we went out and got a general bond because our budget limitations were so strict that we couldn't possibly afford to take on every seizure because the bond prices were so expensive. I mean, it would have probably cost us like $500,000 or more in just bond prices. So we got that general bond, so we pay a flat fee, and we don't pay individual bond fees. So now we're able to actually seize a lot more product. And then on the online, in the online space, I mean, China marketplaces, they are all over the place. So I work with Trevor and his team, and we are constantly sweeping those sites, conducting takedowns. We even have a few like really big counterfeiters and infringers that have separate sites, and Mark Monitor's been wonderful in helping assist us with those as well.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. What are the sites in Latin America that are similar to Alibaba and DHgate?
Primarily Mercado Libre, and it's just like eBay. They have Mercado in every single country in Latin America. And then after this, I can send a few more. I don't know the names off the top of my head. Trevor might if he's on this call. But I can send a list of them out to you as well.
Perfect. Great. Thank you again, Jenny. We appreciate you sharing those best practices with our audience. I'd also like to thank everyone tuning in for their participation. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and a recording within the next couple of days. So you can be sure to be on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day, everyone.